On this episode of the show, I have with me Daniel Whatley. He is a co-founder at Vividly, and we're going to be talking about having a clean slate when you start as a co-founder. What do I mean about that? Well, Daniel started his company while he was still in school. We're going to talk about how he balanced that, being in school and being a co-founder. And a lot of times he was the youngest person in the room. We're going to talk about how those experiences shaped who he is now and how that's changed, and hopefully a few other things. Daniel, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Love to know what Vividly does before we dive on in.
For sure. Vividly is a startup that I co-founded. I'm the technical co-founder. We work with a lot of consumer packaged goods brands. So think about all the food and beverage brands you see at your local grocery store. But right now we're actually expanding into other verticals as well, such as pet food, health and wellness, beauty, alcohol, a lot of other verticals in which our system's applicable. But we started out in food and beverage, and actually right out the gate when my brother Alex actually and I were both working on the software, we were actually working with our other two co-founders, or who would eventually become our other two co-founders, Stu and Nikki. And they were actually respectively at two different CPG companies, consumer packaged goods, CPG, and they were essentially our design partners. You know, they would have a process they were used to in doing their work on the sales and finance side of their respective companies, and we would essentially build whatever was in their mind. And at a high level, our business deals with analytics as well as just optimizing the workflow at these CPG companies and making our customers' lives as easy as possible. Because a lot of times what they do before they bring on a software like ours is use spreadsheets to do their work. And some examples of what they use spreadsheets to do is answer questions like, which discounts that I promoted at Target or Walmart or any other grocery store, Whole Foods, et cetera, which one was the most effective, and how much did I spend at each grocery store, and how much can I expect to spend next year? How much can I expect to make next year? And which promotions are just a waste of time? Which should I not have run at all? And another question we help answer is things like, were all my expenditures legit, right? Like when a grocery store charges me for a promotion that I ran, should they actually have charged me? Did they add an extra zero onto the number that they charged me? Stuff like that. So, our system is a much more efficient way of answering questions like that. And for example, giving reports to your boss as a salesperson or as a finance person. Yeah.
Fantastic. I love it. I mean, that could be an interesting episode itself, diving into the impact within the industry. But today we're going to be talking about, kind of your journey as a co-founder. So let's start. I know you told me you started this startup while in school. There's a lot of questions there, but I'd like to know the timeline. So I think I obviously have talked to you. I know the benefit, but I want the audience to know kind of the timeline of when you were in school and when did the company start?
Yeah, I was in school from 2016 to 2020, and the official founding date of the company was in 2017. That's when I was a sophomore in college, and my brother Alex actually went to Harvard. So, MIT and Harvard are very close to each other. We would meet up very often and work on the product together. And honestly, it was a blast. Like, I had a great time just working with Alex and, getting a lot of features shipped, getting customer feedback, very much live with Stu and Nikki on video calls frequently. And honestly, I would relive those moments if I could.
Absolutely. I guess, while you're at MIT, so obviously, someplace where the academic standards and the rigor's high. You also are during COVID, and so obviously some unknowns in there as well. And you decide to start a company. I think that sounds really complex and complicated. A lot of people are just trying to get through COVID. You had a bunch of stuff going on. I guess talk to us a little bit about the decision. While you're in school, you're getting a fantastic education. You probably could do anything you want after that. But you decide, I see an opportunity, or I have a desire to start a company. Was it a desire? Did you see an opportunity? And what was the thought behind that?
Yeah, I think it really came from just seeing the impact that we could have on this industry, on the CPG industry. And as I was progressing through school, as I was progressing through my my sophomore, junior, senior years, and even approaching that COVID period, right? I actually did have, like, in 2019, right before I graduated, I did have a couple offers in hand, right? I did have a return offer from my junior year to senior year summer internship, and I did have a couple other companies who I was interviewing with, and they did give me an offer. And what I thought about was, you know, I have these companies where I could work at and probably do great work at, and I would have a lot more chances to do things like that. And I have a startup that I really enjoy, that I probably wouldn't have another chance to do something similar in the near future, or it would take so much more work to find another industry that I'm passionate for and that really needs some change. And I kind of seized that opportunity that was much harder to come by. And I'm, in hindsight, really glad I did that.
Awesome. I guess you mentioned you see this opportunity. The company itself, you described what it does within consumer packaged goods. Where did you see that opportunity? It seems like a very, interesting problem to solve for a very large audience. But where did that visibility into the problem originate from?
Yeah. So my brother, Alex, when he was doing one of his research courses at Harvard, he actually got introduced to the problem through a mutual connections parent who worked as a consultant for some CPG brands. And that's where the impetus for the the software and the business came about, right? And Alex was actually the first one who built kind of a proof of concept of the software. And then at one point, Alex approached me and was like, "Hey, I'm doing a lot of demos with customers, and also trying to make sure the site doesn't go down, and trying to make sure all the bugs get fixed. And I need someone else to also help with features." And I'm like, "Okay, okay, okay, I'll help you out." And then, in effect, I became his partner and one of his most trusted partners. And I'd say Alex is also, honestly, one of my most trusted partners.
That's cool. That's great. That's first of all, obviously, MIT, Harvard, you guys put some smarts behind that. So that's pretty amazing to apply that kind of brain power to an industry that probably doesn't get a lot of innovation. I guess in some ways, I mean, in some ways they do, some ways they don't. Which you described, it sounds like you guys were at the right time, the right place. I guess the timing of COVID, and obviously you had options as well along the way, but the timing of COVID, looking at that and going, you know what? All these CPG outlets are dealing with new supply chains, which is an interesting dynamic to what you're doing, by the way. But I guess that factoring into what you saw as an opportunity, how did you turn that into an advantage? Because I think a lot of people, we're seeing a lot of businesses start during COVID now. Now I'm tracking them, and you're one of them. And they all saw something of an opportunity where a lot of people didn't. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think especially during COVID, I think in some aspects, actually, the market improved for us. Obviously, there were some customers or some potential customers we were trying to bring on who were like, this is such an uncertain period. We're freezing all of our expenses. We can't really spend on a software like yours. But to be honest, after a few months into that kind of initial uncertain period, we actually saw a lot of customers coming to us and being like, "Hey, we need something like your software because we, can't hire as many heads as we wanted to, and we really need something to help improve the efficiency." And that's kind of what you alluded to, right? It's like this industry is, quite frankly, not the most technologically savvy, and I think there's a lot of benefit. It's ripe for disruption, and I think, like, anyone who's technically able and technically proficient can really build something that's, like, given the right set of people and the right partnership, which I don't think there's many better partnerships in the world than the one that Stu and Nikki have created with me and Alex.
Fantastic. I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about. I mean, we've talked about you starting this in school. We could probably talk about how you balance your schedule. That's a whole different conversation about the efficiency, but we'll leave that for now. I guess you were young. Obviously, you're still in school. You're talking to people in an industry where it's maybe a more mature setting, for lack of a better word. We'll try to go with that. And you mentioned being the youngest in the room sometimes, and it kind of resonated with me. I'd like to kind of hear a little bit about that experience and kind of just that experience initially.
Yeah, for sure. I think something that came to light for me pretty early on was like, I agree, like, definitely more mature setting in a, you know, people years sort of way. But I realized pretty quickly that whenever I was, witnessing interactions between, myself or someone else and someone in the CPG field, I was more than in the vast majority of instances, the most knowledgeable about technology, right? And that's kind of just a given fact about the industry. And one of my most cherished memories actually is when the four of us co-founders, like me, Alex, and Stu and Nikki, actually met together in Boston for like a conference, and it was a CPG conference where a lot of people from the industry gathered together in one of the buildings in the Seaport district of Boston, and we essentially talked about best practices, right? There were a lot of presenters. They talked about best practices in the industry. One of the presenters asked a question saying, how many of you are confident in your ability to manage trade spend? And then the only people who raised their hands were Stu and Nikki and Alex and me, and no one else raised their hand. And then he proceeded to show kind of a spreadsheet based system of how to manage trade spend. And then we were like, well, we built something way better than that. And I think it was pretty evident from that experience that, I think that even though, yes, like on paper, the number of years of experience that someone has working professionally is higher, it doesn't always mean they have experience in every possible field. And technology is definitely not a field that many people have much, if any, experience in this industry.
Interesting. I guess if you were to, you've been running the company for several years now. Obviously, you still go into these meetings, probably still the youngest in the room. If you were to look back at the initial days of the company and holding client meetings, client calls, and now, has anything changed?
I think some things are, some things as you said stay the same, right? I think especially even within our company, right, on the engineering team, we've hired a few interns and younger employees on the team who, who have since like left the company because their internships have ended or whatnot. But I still am the youngest full-time person on the engineering team. I'm pretty sure I am. And, some things kind of have stayed the same also in the sense that this is my first full-time job. So people who join our company usually have worked at more places than me, but definitely some things have changed. And one of the things that's changed is I've seen a lot more. And I've seen growth, hyper growth, and what happens when you grow too quickly, right? And I think from those experiences, I'm able to, really think about how can we scale our software, right? How can we most effectively bring on a much bigger customer than we used to have, right? And I did not know those things previously. Like early on, I remember there was a period of time over the holidays when Alex and I were trying to think of ways to improve the speed of the system because it was really slow, right? And I think we had like 1,000th, if not 1/10,000th, the amount of data in the platform as we do today. And even that might be a little high. It might even be like 100,000th. But that is to say that at this point, I think I have become not only a much better engineer as a result of all those experiences, but also just I've worked with so many different types of people, and everyone has taught me something new. And I think, in a sense, like I have become one of the more experienced people in the room, even though I'm still younger than a lot of people I work with.
Absolutely. And let me ask you this question. You know, you took a job. Well, you had internships. You're at MIT. You start a company during COVID, which I think is a great story in of itself. This might be your first full time job as well, and you're a co-founder, so you're learning a lot. You mentioned, you can go too fast almost. As you look back on these, 7, 8 years of being a co-founder, and you've gotten probably some trial by fire aspects of being in management, understanding management. Talk to us a little bit about that experience, because I think the lore of startups is you go to a great school, or you go to school, you become a startup, but you drop out because it's too much. You obviously didn't, but still that early to be able to also be a co-founder, you've got to be a quick learner of management and executive skills. Talk to us a little bit about that.
For sure. There's a lot of things, and it's not just management and executive leadership. There's a lot of things you just don't learn in school, right? And
Absolutely.
even a lot of things related to engineering that I'm just like, why didn't I learn this in any engineering class? But it's like kind of obvious. You can't learn everything in a class that, most people are expected to get a passing grade on, right? Like that's kind of just not how the world works in general. But like, again, that's another whole podcast discussion in and of itself. But I think one of the most eye-opening experiences for me was when, I realized that I was managing people older than me. I think that was like a really big kind of culture shock type deal, right? And a lot of people, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone I've worked with, and I don't really hold grudges against anyone. I think life is way too short for that, but oftentimes there are going to be people on the team who look at you as someone in an executive position who's much younger than them, and they're not going to be like very happy with that, right? They're often going to try in any way they can, right? Like people, I think part of human nature is just like wanting what's best for each individual person, right? Like wanting what's best for yourself, and that's very natural. And people see you as kind of an easy target if you're younger and less experienced, and there's going to be a lot more ways to kind of get stepped on as someone who's younger, right? And I think that has happened to me in various different ways, but I think it's just going to happen, right? Like to anyone who's listening to this, and if you're a younger co-founder, a younger exec member, right, it's going to happen, and you have to expect it, right? And I think I just didn't really expect all the possible scenarios that could happen, and it kind of came as a shock to me at first, but that's honestly also how I learned, and how I am much more resilient now, and how I'm able to deal with a much wider range of scenarios than I was.
Absolutely. I am curious. Obviously you've had the benefit of this, education through the process of starting a company, being a co-founder, obviously getting a great education. If you're looking back, and it's easy to look back, and as you mentioned, you don't know what you don't know, and you're learning a lot. Outside of that, because I'm sure there's a lot you've learned, as you mentioned, are there a couple things that stand out? If someone is like, hey, I'm in school and I do want to be a founder, is there one or two things where you're like, I really wish somebody would have told me to go just understand, learn, read this before diving headlong into this?
I think the first one is don't give up. That's honestly, like, I know everyone says that, but honestly, I've come to learn the meaning of that in so many different ways over the time I've spent at Vividly, right? Like, don't give up. If something seems really hard to you, think about how many problems you've solved before, right? You've solved a million problems before. This is the million and first, right? And, think about how many people have honestly dealt with so much worse, right? Like, if you think about this really frustrating thing you're facing, right? There's like multiply that by 10 and you're probably still not at the most frustrating thing someone has ever faced in life. So don't worry about it, right? Like, just don't stress, keep a positive attitude, and don't give up. The second one is, not everyone is going to be, able to give you the advice you need to get better, right? Like, I think even if someone is really experienced, and, again, I don't mean any disrespect to anyone I've worked with, not everyone is going to be able to tell you how to be a better co-founder, how to be a better manager, how to be a better engineer, right? Obviously, there's people who are going to be able to tell you that, and you should definitely build great relationships with them. However, not everyone is capable of doing that, and I think I realized that a little slowly compared to some other people I know.
I think that's actually fantastic. My daughter's 11, and I always tell her what I've learned. I never tell her do this because I realize that even if you as a co-founder would have gone to somebody who had the exact same trajectory, they have different components in there. There are different aspects of their trajectory that might have been different to yours, different root cause effects. And I think it's really hard for somebody to say, go do this because it worked for me. I think it's really hard. So I do actually sometimes believe inexperience gives you an open, clean slate, as the topic for this episode was, to kind of learn faster than some of those preconceived. Obviously, sometimes through experience, you learn where the dead bodies are buried, and you tend to avoid stepping on them. So those are always good. I love the story. I love the fact that you have this trajectory and you take this opportunity because you could have obviously taken the job. Do you ever look back and go, if I'd have just taken the job, it'd have been easier? And I'm not saying this, it's not fulfilling, but being a co-founder is hard. I'm sure you have a lot of friends you graduate with that did take jobs. Does that ever cross your mind as a founder? Oh man, some days just having that job would have been a little bit easier.
If I took the job, I most likely would have been laid off. So I don't, yeah, I don't know if I would still have the job now.
That's too good.
I mean, things would be easier in the sense that I wouldn't have been working and I could have
Yeah.
spent more time, like, just being a normal, like 20 something year old or, yeah, but, I think, I don't regret this at all. Like, I think being a co-founder and having this experience has really allowed me to showcase the best parts of myself, both personally and professionally. And I've learned so much more about myself. I've learned so much more about how to even just be a more effective person in my daily life, around my family, friends, relationships, and so on and so forth. And I think I would not have given up any of it.
Awesome, man. Daniel, thanks for taking the time. I know you're busy. I appreciate the thoughts and insights. If somebody does want to connect with you, because obviously I know there's a lot of people that might connect to the story because they want to do something similar. Is there a way of touching base with you and picking your brain as to what you have mentioned on the show?
Yeah, for sure. LinkedIn is the easiest way to do that. And my email is daniel@govividly.com if you want to get in touch. And our website is govividly.com.
Okay. Awesome, man. I really do appreciate your time. Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. This was really fun.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this show. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, Daniel just walked us through basically how he started as a co-founder student in MIT. Obviously, a lot of different components there while going through COVID. And he did talk to us about his learning lessons, how it was to be the youngest in the room, and what he's learned through that process. And he actually mentioned it's actually made him better in other facets of his life. And I think it's some great advice if you are looking to start a company, especially if you are still in school. I think this would be the episode for you. So share this with somebody else who might benefit from it. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.